Hey folks, welcome to another Glimpse of Luna video where I'm going to be talking about skills and the kind of distributions that they have amongst the different factions. I also want to talk about how even though you see a skill on a unit during a game, you can't just take it at face value that you know exactly what the skill does, because some of them are have different effects that are attached to them, and it's a little bit confusing at times. But once we go through it, it should make a wee bit more sense for to you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to select the Norder at the beginning here, because the first skill that we're going to cover is mostly a Norder ability, although there is an interesting Nafas effect that goes along with it. So okay, the first skill we're going to cover here is Counter Strike, and I'll bring up one of these two. These two units actually have the same type of Counter Strike, but there is another guy that is different from them. So what does Counter Strike do? Well, it means that anytime someone attacks this unit and they're within range of this guy, so basically next to him, he will automatically get a free attack back at them. What that means is it's effectively going to end up trading potentially more damage than you might want to. It's quite a powerful ability. But with a relatively low stat line like a 4 defense, you can kill this guy possibly with one unit that has enough to tank off this 7, and it's not too big a deal. But it gets a little bit more complex when you get to Martin. Martin, obviously, being a master as opposed to a pioneer, like Knut, is that little bit better using the ability. So he's got a high defense value here. And this means that potentially you could have to fight him with 2 or 3 units to possibly take him down. That's kind of a concern, since you could be giving away more stars than he's actually worth. Martin's a really powerful master because of it. My suggestion, if you're looking to counter this sort of effect, is that you would use ranged units, or you would try and hit him with units that are tough enough to survive against the 7 damage. Yeah, if you're looking to buff this guy up, then putting equipment onto him is a really beneficial thing to do. I like to give him most of my equipment at times, where I'll give him extra movement, put him up to 12 defense, and then give him some extra attack as well. Makes him a real threat on the battlefield, and gives pause for thought when people are trying to take him down. Okay, now, this is the interesting thing about skills in this game. Although these are the Counter-Strike abilities, there is another one for Nafas that Juk has. Now, it's a slightly worse ability than what exists under the Norder, because it's last strike, Counter-Strike. What this means is that he will only strike back against the person that actually kills him in combat. So, you can attack him with weaker units to lower his defense and then send in something fairly disposable to get the last hit on him, or possibly just shoot him at range for the last hit, and therefore he doesn't actually get to use his last strike ability. So, if you are used to playing against the Nafas and seeing Juk, and you think that these cross swords here mean that you've only got last strike, and then suddenly you come up against the Norder who are using Counter Strike, Riposte, then you might get a bit of a fright in these early stages of the game. So do keep an eye on this. And this is the sort of thing that I'm going to be talking about in this video. There are various different types of ability for each of these icons. Moving on to the next one that's much more straightforward. The Norder don't actually have this themselves, but I think most of the other factions have it now. Master of Styles. So Master of Styles is a very basic ability. You will only ever find it on a marksman. And it means that rather than losing 50% of your damage when you melee someone, you will do your full damage. So it's effectively making your marksman unit sort of like a hermeticist, although it does still count as a marksman at the same time. You'll tend to only find this on very few units for each of the factions. You're seeing that we're seeing them on masters for both of these two. The arachnids do have, after the newest patch, this character here who's got Master of Styles though. 5/5, decent stat line. Master of Styles means that it's still quite a good card. And it's sitting on a 2-star, which is quite a useful thing. Just gives this a bit more flexibility. It's nice to be able to use the range on these cards and still be able to hit in melee with them. Okay, next one. Dashing. There are two different, actually there are three different types of dash after the newest patch. There is the dashing that the Norder have access to, and also the Arachnids, which is strike and dash. What this means is that when you hit someone in melee, you get to attack, and then you get to step out afterwards, which is quite valuable. Might seem like it's a bit niche. Sometimes it can be, but there's a real power that can be pulled off with it, where if you're limited on space, then you can run in, attack with one of these units, move back, and if you've only got 1 or 2 hexes to play with, you might be able to get another unit or 2 into position to kill off someone. Whereas if this unit didn't have strike and dash, then you wouldn't be able to get in properly and finish off a guy. So keep them in mind. The level of flexibility that these provide are quite powerful. There is another type of a dash ability called shoot and dash. Shoot and dash basically does the same thing, except that you do it when you shoot. So you can only do it at range. You get to move the space afterwards. It works in much the same way as strike and dash does. Potentially gives you the same sort of options of being able to clear up spaces and have other people come in to attack. I would say that shoot and dash is probably a weaker ability overall, since you're not going to be able to move a unit in and then attack at range. So it's very situational. There's the last one is a type of dashing is now called, and this is a bit of a mouthful, strike or shoot and dash. This is purely available on this hero for the Tagari, and he is able to do either a strike and dash attack or a shoot and dash attack. So he's going to be going in and doing 8 damage in melee and then dashing out, or he gets to do 15 damage at range and then he gets to move out afterwards. The flexibility that this provides for a hero is very, very good. It means that he's able to get into positions and survive that little bit longer, which is a nice thing to see. And it really brought something to this character that was missing from him. So it made him quite powerful at that. Okay, next one, multi-strike. Multi-strike has a lot of different iterations, so you have to be very careful when you're going up against this ability. This is actually one of the ones specifically that's made me want to talk about this video. Okay, so we've got Troop Slayer. The double swords moving in the direction. It means that this is going to do double damage when attacking troops in ranged combat. So only if they're at range, and you'll do 6 damage to people that are troops. Troops being units that can stack here. They have the little tent icon, and if you're able to stack up units, then they're counted as troops. So there aren't an awful lot of them for some of the factions. But Norder don't have any of these. The Arachnids don't have any of these. But the Tagari have loads of them. And there are lots of different types. So, we'll take a look here. So the first one that we covered were troops. This one, though, is double strike that is doing damage to isolated targets. An isolated target is a unit that has no other unit and another hex around it. So if you can isolate units, then you can suddenly provide quite nice attacks into killing off guys that you might otherwise not have the attack to finish off. You have to be quite careful when playing against this sort of ability, because it basically means that your hero you might think is safe in one spot and then suddenly isn't, or a high defense unit that's protecting an area, it suddenly just falls to pieces. There are this character here again has the double damage onto troops, but you have to be very careful when it comes to this card. Now this card for the Tagari, fairly weak stat line, but what this does is triple damage to troops. So again, you have to be very careful on that, because you might be expecting a double damage from a multi-strike and suddenly this is doing a triple damage. So this is perfectly capable of severely weakening or possibly even killing large troop blocks. So it can be a real surprise for people if they're not used to this card. I believe the rest of these are all double damages. Double damage to isolated. This one's isolated and double damage, I believe. Yep. This is double damage to troops. This one is double damage to isolated. And this one is double damage to isolated. So, got to be careful with your placement. Potentially, it's worth putting some extra units around cards that could be attacked by multi-strike just to be safe on them. Next one along here is Raider. There are very few Raiders. The Arachnids have one of them. What this ability does is that it will either boost up a stat in some way when they kill a unit. So in this case, this card will get extra attack whenever it kills an enemy. Fairly self-explanatory. Gets quite good on this guy because he's a marksman, so every time he hits an odd number in his ability here, he's going to get effectively more damage in melee. The only other cards that have access to this are the Tagari. You've got a 2-star variant here, which starts off with a relatively low stat line, but will get defense every time they kill a unit. Interestingly, whenever you're killing troop blocks with this type of ability, it will boost up by the number of guys in the troop that you killed. So, for example, if you've got 3 cards sitting on top of each other, not only will it be wiping out 3 stars for the opponent, but it will be giving 3 extra stats onto these guys as well. And that goes for the Arachnid one as well at the same time. Kalik has the same sort of ability here. He's getting an extra 1 every time onto his defense, every time he kills a guy as well. And again, he gets the troop bonus. So, you know, that can be quite a powerful ability. Next part, Willbreaker. Willbreaker, you can see there aren't an awful lot of these abilities. They are existing mostly, in fact, only on heroes. And these are detrimental stat changes to the opponent's hero. It specifically only affects the enemy's hero. So every time this guy kills somebody, the opponent hero's defense decreases by 1. So that is a way that this guy can basically weaken your hero at range and then eventually get them into a position that they get picked off by lighter units later in the game. It's kind of hard to play around this ability sometimes. The best way to avoid having that happen is either to try and trade off your leader early or potentially dodge this guy as much as possible with all units, which is not always easy to do on a board. So you have to watch out for that one. The Norder have a slightly different effect for this ability, which is -1 attack to the enemy's hero. Again, something that I didn't cover with the Nafas guy, but it happens with both of them, is that when these are killing troop blocks, again, they're reducing from the enemy hero by fairly large amounts of defense or attack. So do keep an eye out on that. Next ability. This is very much a Norder wheelhouse, although the Arachnids do have access to it as well. Nafas and Tagari don't have any of them. These all do the same thing. Lesser reinforcement means that if this unit gets the killing blow, and it has to specifically be a killing blow onto a unit, doesn't matter if it's a troop or not, the enemy will get 1 less reinforcement place. So that's 1 less card that they can play out of their hand on their turn. Something to note is that the Norder have access to 2 of these. So if Otis was to kill off something in a turn, and you also did the same with Rudolph in the turn, then that would mean the opponent could place only 1 card going into theirs. So you do have to be somewhat careful against this, because you might think that you've got lots of reinforcement coming in to defend against a push, and suddenly you can only place 1 card and your defense can kind of fall to pieces around it. So do watch out for that. Okay, this is one of the more complex abilities again, Resilience. All factions have access to this. Oh, except the Arachnids. Didn't actually realize the Arachnids didn't have any there. Okay, Nafas. Vemifear has a type of ability that makes him immune to ranged attacks. The ranged attacks means that if you're attacking at range with either marksmen or with hermeticists, they will do no damage. But If you run into melee and stab this thing, then it will take damage as normal. Now, the Norder also have this ability with Ygritte. It's an anti-ranged attack, but it gets a wee bit more complex when it comes to some of the other guys. So Volgar has a complete resilience to all Hermeticists. So it doesn't matter if they attack them at range or in melee, they're going to take no damage from Hermeticists. You really need to be... You get used to these fairly quickly, I find. But sometimes in the heat of battle, it might be a misclick that you'll end up attacking this guy with a Hermeticist, thinking that it's going to do something, and suddenly it can completely muck up your plans. So do be careful of that. There's, on a similar note, Kapu for the Tagari has the same sort of thing going, except for Marksman. He is completely immune to Marksman, both in melee and at range. Again, I've had people, especially newer players, make the big mistake of thinking that they're safe to kill this guy and not reading the ability properly. So do watch out for that. Still got quite a few to go here. We've got Bequest abilities. All factions have access to these. And they are buffs to units that exist around them. The important thing to take note of is that each of these are going to affect a different type of unit. But the most important thing is that they will never affect troops. So in this guy's case, he will boost up all melee guys that are around him. But they are not going to boost up troop blocks. So if we go back here again, if you've got a block of these guys, you're not going to get a big buff onto lots of your different troops. That's just not going to happen. Even if you have one of these guys sitting next to him, you're not going to get the buff at that. So do watch out for that. So in the case of the Nafas, they've got access to Fastcore. He's going to give that attack there to warriors. Can be quite useful for some of the heroes like Reark getting access to it. It's also useful for other units such as Drax. Drax having a relatively low attack stat. It's quite good to get it onto him. And you can use it in so many different ways. There's an awful lot of different melee characters that can have access to it. And it's going to boost up your individual melee 1-stars as well. So it's only troops that it doesn't affect. There are a few different types of this effect, so you do need to keep an eye on them. This again is a melee unit bonus to attack, but there's also units like Jochen that is going to give defense value to all targets that are next to them, so that can boost up your Hermeticists, your Marksmen, etc, etc. Does make it quite dangerous to attack this guy if he's surrounded by a bunch of other units, because it can suddenly muck up plans or make units too difficult to take out properly. You've also got Yavar, who is giving melee units that permanent buff too. When you get over to the Tagari, it gets a little bit different. The Tagari have the same sort of ability, but they are boosting up ranged units that are attached to them, marksmen that are attached. You've also got Hermeticist buffs. And of course, you've got the standard friendly warrior buff to attack there as well. The Arachnids also have a melee attack. So yeah, just keep an eye on what those types of unit do, because it can take you by surprise a little bit if this person dies and suddenly it boosts up an enemy that you didn't think was then able to kill you, but it suddenly does. This is very much something that the Arachnids have access to after death effects, but the Nafas do have one as well. Again, these affect either attack or defense on the opponent's individual units, will not affect any troops, so you can use troops to safely take out these people. That's something that's very noteworthy on them. But they will either weaken the enemy's attack or the enemy's defense. In this case, the enemy units permanently decreases their attack value. The Arachnids have a few others. -3 to attack value here from this one. You've got attack value on this card, but you've also got defense value on this one. So that is something to take account of. It's also defense on this person here. And this one is attack as well. Moving along again, impairment effects. Very much a wheelhouse of the Arachnids. Tagari and Norder don't have any use for these, but the Nafas do have a few effects on them as well. You have to be very careful keeping account of what this card does, because there are 3 different types of it. So we've got attack value deduction, again, cannot affect troops. So do take account of that. No impairment effect will affect a troop. So this one is reducing the attack on units. This one is changing the defense on units. And this one is stunning units. So paralyzation means that they will not be able to act in their next turn. It can be very dangerous to get hit by these. So do keep an eye on them. There can be all sorts of ways of using the paralyze effect. You can use it to completely blunt attacks. You can use it to stun off the enemy's hero and advance all your units. You can use it to block so that only a couple of guys can get into you when you might need 3 to kill you. Lots and lots of abilities, lots and lots of effects that can be used with paralysis based on board positioning. As I say, the arachnids have a lot of these. They've got a double paralyze. They've got the paralyze from the leader that they can use here, their hero. But they've also got one on Thera, so they can potentially completely shut down a flank with this. You've also got the reduction in defense value here from this Scorpion. This unit is used quite often to with some equipment to massively boost up his attack, because this one's a little bit different in that its main stat line here is going to be used to reduce that amount from the enemy's defense. So rather than it being a straight up hard -2 or -3, as a lot of the other units affect, this guy is based on how much he hits by. So if you manage to get him and hit the enemy leader, and they're quite a tough leader, suddenly they become quite squishy for the rest of the game, and it's much easier to take them out. So do watch out for this guy. Lastly, we've got Toxical. Toxical is range 3 and is able to nip down at the enemy, reducing attack. So you do have to be quite careful fighting against this card. If you start to miss that, suddenly it can completely blunt an offense that you might have rolling. Okay, next we have Assassination. Not all factions have access to this. You've got the Nafas, Norder, and Arachnids that do, but the Tagari don't. So, Assassination is relatively straightforward. It will execute any unit of the same star value as the card that's attacking, and it will completely ignore the defense stat compared to the offense stat. So if this guy was to attack a 2-star unit that had 9 defense, then it would instantly kill it. Would just ignore this number here. It does quite matter. The assassination ability is always specifically based on your star level and then looking at the enemy star level. So while the Nafas version can kill Pioneers, which are the 2 stars, Knight here is able to assassinate 3 stars, but he will not assassinate those lower than him. So you do have to keep an eye on the assassination effect and what it's actually going to take out. The Arachnids as well have an assassin. It's a little bit different from the others because, again, it's at range, much like Toxico. So you do have to watch out for this just killing off your 2-star guys that you're trying to sneak up on it with. Or maybe your positioning's just a bit off and it could possibly assassinate you. Next, we have Enhancements. And Deteriorations kind of go along with it as well. The game has recently just had some changes to it, where a lot of the Deteriorations have been kind of taken out of the game. But you can see that in regards to Enhancements, it very much exists across the board. What you might also notice is that these enhancements are specifically put all onto Guardians. So Guardians are basically changing the stat line of the enemy's units. And they will do either... They're either going to change attack values or defense values for all of your units of a specific type. So in the case of Arsok here, he is giving all 1 movement units plus 1 defense. And the other thing to take into account is that it's the base stat line that it's looking at for these cards. So that means that if you were to take, let me just show you. If we were to take our equipment here that gives us a unit plus 1 move and put that onto a 1-star unit. Let's see. Let's try and find one here. So if we take this guy and give him 2 move, he would actually still have the stat line buff because his base stat here is 1. So that can be quite useful for planning out how you want to build a deck. These things are most likely going to change how you're going to create a deck in the first place, and you're going to take a different Guardian based off the type of stat that you're looking to buff. So in the case of the Nafas, it's your one movement guys that are getting defense. In the case of Norder, it's either your female cards that are getting a buff onto their attack, or it's your one movement guys that are getting a +1 attack. In the case of the Arachnids, all of your troops are going to get an attack. And the Tigari it's either going to give defense to their Hermeticists, or in the case of Piwa, you're going to give all your marksmen a bonus. So it's very much something that you're going to be using at deck creation, as opposed to halfway through a game. Deterioration effects. No one has these anymore, except for the Arachnids. This is one that I have a little bit of a bugbear with. They have this Guardian here, and it will reduce the attack of all movement 3 units. This is a particularly frustrating thing for the Tigari, although it does really quite change up the matchup with a few of the other factions as well. The main reason that it affects the Tigari is that they have an awful lot of high movement 3 movement units. So it can be a bit upsetting for them to suddenly lose a huge amount of damage out of their line. The Norder do have 3 movement units as well, but there's a lot less of them. Same with the Nafas. But it's definitely a very frustrating effect. Okay, next ability. Power attacks. Not all factions have access to these. Norder have them, and the Arachnids have them, but Nafas and Tigari do not. Okay, so what do these do? These are giving extra damage to any unit that has a higher star value than the unit that is hitting them. There's something to take into account with this, is that even though you get more stars out of killing blocks of troops, this will not do extra damage to troops. It's only doing it to 2-star, 3 stars, and Guardians or Heroes. So that's definitely something to take into account. A thing to note with Power Attack is that the number that it actually does is different on some of the cards. So you do have to be quite careful with that. In general, what I found is that the base value of these will all add up to 6. Although you do have to be quite careful with it, because in the case of the Guardians for the Norder, there are some that are going to buff up these units. So sometimes it can be actually 7 damage that they do. What I'm talking about here is that base value 3, and then base value 3 leads up to 6 here. But again, because Helga is boosting females, and this character is a female, they're going to be doing 7 damage, and so would Frauga in that case. The Arachnids have a similar thing going on. They've got 1 unit with power attack, and again, it's leading up to 6 with the value there. So keep an eye on that. Next one, Protector. Protector is something that exists for the Nafas and the Arachnids, and somewhat limitedly in the Norder as well. I suppose as much as the Arachnids, just a slightly weaker unit. The Tigari do have access to it, but it is only on one of their heroes. So, there are a few different types of these. What this does is it will create a protection slot either in front of, beside, or behind units, and it will make them immune to ranged attacks. Now, on the field, you'll be able to view this, if you're playing against it or with it, as a white hexagon that sits within the standard outline of the hexagon that your guy's within. So keep an eye on that. You might have seen it, you might not know what it means. That's what it means. If you see a particularly bright one compared to a darker one, it means that there's a double layer of protection that's sitting over the thing. So keep an eye on that as well, because it might be, you might think that taking out one protector is enough to give your ranged units access to killing someone. Actually, it might be more than that, so do keep an eye on it. In the case of this card, it's a forward protection, which is the most powerful of the effects. You've got Bricks, who is doing the two hexes behind him. That is the weaker of the effects, effectively because this guy has to put himself into danger to protect the other people. And then you've got Brux, who is doing a side-by-side protection. So the hexes to the left and right hand side of him are going to have protection. This is the sort of average or moderate one. It can mean that your units can move up into position to shoot at other guys that are ahead, but Brux is still putting himself into threat at the same time. So it's a somewhat average version of it. Finn is the only actual mobile unit in the game that has access to the forward protection, which massively makes him the best protector. His stat line is not exactly to die for, but he is tough enough to survive in situations that one unit might not be able to get to him and kill him properly. Certainly for a 1-star, he far outshines the other protectors. So, worth taking him out if you're concerned about any sort of range protection on the field. In the case of the Norder, they've got Kellen. He's got a side-by-side protection. Not the best stat line for it, but he is only a 2-star. It definitely has its place. Personally, I don't tend to use this guy too much, but you could definitely fit him into a deck quite comfortably. The Tagari version is the weakest of the protector effects, since you are protecting the spaces behind and have to put your leader into danger for it. But it's quite a chunky stat line on this character. And then the Arachnids have a side-by-side protection. But this is a much better stat line than the Norder equivalent, because this is a 3-star. This is a great 3-star master. Very powerful. Can really cause a lot of problems when you're trying to defend against the push from it. So yeah, one to keep an eye on. Next, we have Fighting Spirit. There's quite a few units that have Fighting Spirit. You see the Tagari have the most. And they all do different effects again. It's either attack or defense that they're going to boost. And they all do it in different ways. So, this hero for the Nafas, +1 defense every time you lose one of your masters. Your masters are your 3-star guys. So, it's not one of the greatest abilities, because you do have to lose some of your stronger units to get access to it. But it does mean that this guy with his nice 9 attack is able to be a bit of a bully on the battlefield at times. So keep an eye out for him. The Norder have probably one of the strongest versions in Thea, Mother of Beasts. This is one of the new masters that just came into the game in the recent patch. And they are getting +2 attack whenever they drop below 10 or 20 morale. So as the game goes on, this card will naturally get stronger and stronger. If you give this potentially movement bonuses, it's a real game ender where you're able to send quite a high attack into the opponent, because this can end up as an 11 base, but also you could get +1 from Helga, so you could have a 12 attack, and that's even without putting any equipment onto this card. So it can be a real powerhouse in the end game, and can be a bit of a surprise for people as well coming out. The Tagari have 2 different types of Fighting Spirit. In the case of Maka, they have the same as the Norder hero, where they get bonuses based on the morale. So +2 attack each time the morale drops. Nuka, who is a hero for the Tagari, also has this ability, so can end up with 14 attack here, which is really strong. And then you've got Miko, who gets defense based on the 10 and 20 morale step, and becomes quite tanky because of it. Slightly weaker to begin with, but better in the late game. The Arachnids have a particularly annoying version of this ability, where they're getting extra defense on this hero on the 20 and 10, which will eventually bring this stat line up to 17 defense. Makes it very difficult to take this hero out. So you sometimes have to play around this and just be a wee bit more cautious with it. Okay, moving on. Tactician. I want to make a video on this ability in particular, but it either adds time to yourself or removes time from the opponents. In this case, you are reducing 75 seconds from the opponent's base time. So that is the time that they have to play their turns. There is a type of deck that is used where you will try and reduce the opponent's time as much as possible and put great threat onto them, because if they ever run out of time, they of course lose the game. These 2 cards kind of go hand in hand with that, but there are additional effects, which you'll see when we get to one of the other skills later. This one is reducing a further 30 seconds from the opponent's starting time. The Norder have lots of these types of ability, the Tagari not so much, and the Arachnids have one Tactician style effect. The Norder, you can reduce 30 seconds from the opponent's starting budget with Conrad. Jonas is able to remove 5 seconds from their time each turn. So any time basically that they would get time whenever you hit your end turn button, you would get 5 less time. So you're going to get 55 seconds instead of 60 seconds to worry about your turn. Maro, you get an increased starting budget for your own time. This can counter some of the effects coming out of the Nafas. And then Moonin has an ability, when this card's in your deck, your time gained per turn gets increased by 5. So as long as this guy isn't dead, basically, you'll get extra time. Every time you hit the end turn button, it'll give you an extra 5. Which is the opposite of Jonas, who's taken away from the opponent. Tulok will give you an extra 75 seconds at the start of the game, if you're playing as the Tagari. And Vikit will give you 5 seconds every time you hit the end turn button, as long as he's still alive, or in your deck. And the Arachnids, your starting time budget gets increased by 30 seconds, so they can get some extra time as well. Moving on to the next skill, Manipulation. This is the one that goes hand in hand with Tactician. Nafas have access to it, and the Arachnids, but the Norder and the Tagari do not. Nafas. These abilities specifically affect, well, time in general, but it's every time they kill something that the effect goes off. So in this case, whenever this guy kills a unit, he will take 15 seconds away from the enemy's time. Bear in mind that if you kill lots of troops, then it's going to create multiple time losses to them. So if you were to kill 3 of these guys, you would lose 45 seconds out the opponent's time. Very scary. So do watch out for that. You need to be very careful around this guy that you're not giving him an awful lot of time, because it could completely mess up your game plan. Same thing with Jathazi, except he's doing 10 seconds. The big difference on him is that he's got movement 3, which is quite scary. And the Arachnids recently got quite a few changes to these. Last Hela, who's a master, 30 seconds every time they knock out one of your units. Again, if they were to kill a troop of 3, then that would be 90 seconds you'd be losing out your time, which can potentially make you completely lose the game. If you only got like 60 seconds in the clock, you would suddenly just lose. You've also got another of these cards here, Lastos. These two are also fellowship with each other, by the way, so do get stronger when they're both in the same deck. This guy's doing 15 seconds as opposed to the 30 that Last Hela's doing. And then you've got Diagris here. Whenever he kills enemies, he will give you 10 seconds as opposed to taking it away from the enemy. The time effects of these factored in with the time effects coming from Tactician could be quite scary. Alright, this is already quite a long video, so I'm going to charge through these other ones. AOE Attacks. You can see all factions have them except the Tagari. They work in 2 different ways. So we've got 2 damage onto whatever. So whatever this unit hits, it's going to do 2 damage to every enemy unit around it. That's also the case for Drakan, who does 1 damage. And you've got Juppo that also does 2 damage to the people around. But Saratros has a little bit of a different effect on it called Spinning Attack. It means that the spin, the damage that he does, is based on where he stands. So if he moves into attack, he will hit all the hexes around him. And he's going to do 3 damage to them. Norder. Eric has the same sort of effect as Saratros has. So it's going to do that AoE spinning attack. So he's going to do 3 damage to everything around him. And as does Ador. Arachnids have AoE bombs, either doing 2 damage from this guy or 3 damage from this Guardian. So do watch out for the numbers on those, and just make sure that your units are not too compacted if you're fighting against these types of enemy. Alright, immunity. Arachnids don't have them, Tagari don't have them, Norder don't have them, the Nafas have a couple. What this does is it means that the Impairment, After Death, and Deterioration abilities cannot affect them. So that means that your Deterioration effect is your minuses to stats. Your After Death effects are stuff like the Arachnids have access to, where they're reducing your attack or your defense values. And it also means that they are immune to stuns, like Impairment effects. So you can't be paralyzed on these units. You can't have your stats permanently reduced here by these guys either. So it can be quite useful to give some of these. Can be quite useful to give these these guys some extra stats as a result of it, potentially. I'm not a big fan of putting it onto Vox since he has only one movement, but it can be useful at times onto Draska. Personal choice, really, on that one. The last ability is Alteration. Now, the Nafas and the Tagari have access to this, and to a very limited degree, the Norder, but the Arachnids don't have this at the moment. This is an ability that was changed in the last patch. What it effectively does is that if an enemy is within the range of your card, so in this case range 1, it will change their movement value to 1 as long as this card is alive. So for example, if a movement 3 was to run up and stand next to Blankara for whatever reason and wasn't killed, then the turn afterwards it would only be able to move away 1 space. This that might not seem that good when you look at it from Blankara's perspective, but in the case of the newest master for the Tagari, this hard escape ability is actually based on your range. So you're going to have it on a 2-range unit that can move about the field and potentially can really tie down enemy high movement guys that are trying to fight around it. There's one game that I fought in where I played with that ability, and I was able to trap the enemy hero and stop them from escaping and chase them down over a couple of turns. So it can be really pretty powerful. You do have the same effect on the Norder, but it's not really as effective on them because it's a Guardian which can't move around the field. So it's only if someone chooses to move in there and then has a potential of getting out afterwards. Somewhat niche and not particularly powerful as a result of it on this unit, but it exists there anyway. And that is the end of all of the skills. If there are any skills that you would like me to focus on in more detail, if you could let me know down in the comments. I hope this has been useful to you, and I will be making more videos in the near future. So thanks for watching, folks. Take care, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye for now.